we know it is our station to leave this place in a better state than that in which it existed before we began. This time, we are the ones, the guardians and watchers of our liberty, the stewards of our faith, dangerous good men, we who do not stand by, we who do not comply, we question, we who do not surrender, we persevere. When there were no more mountains to discover, as the world settled into predictability, complacency became father to vice. If everything is easy, nothing is worthwhile. If everything is safe, no one is brave. If there is no fear, there are no heroes. If there is no unknown, there is no faith. It is ours to break the cycle, to seek the difficult because it is difficult. It is ours, the frontier, and we are the new pioneers. What's up, Sunrise Lounge? Welcome in, Warriors. We're in episode 2 of season 3, The New Pioneers. Today, we're talking about the spirit of the pioneer. We're going to go through all the different factors that made the pioneers who they were. What were the defining features of their personality types, their mindsets? What was their mentality as they were moving forward and exploring completely unknown territories and braving the edges of the map? We're going to talk about what those were today. We're going to talk about some of the mistakes they made, some character flaws they had, and what that all looks like together as we set it forward here in postmodern America, and how we are the new pioneers when we stand for the same values, the same principles, and the same mentalities. So let's not waste any more time. We're going to get right into it. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button on YouTube. Get down in the comments. Tell me what you think the spirit of the pioneer is made up of. Watch through the whole episode. And if you're on Spotify or iHeart, make sure you like us, add us to your library. Appreciate y'all for watching. Stick through to the end. Let's begin. I've got a really cool way you can support the Sunrise Lounge. There's a list of things that I need as a creator to make high tier, cinema tier, grade A, S tier content. Instead of just throwing money randomly at the Sunrise Lounge, how about this? Check out my Throne creator wish list. It's an awesome place where I can custom curate a list of things I specifically need so you can donate towards something specific and tangible and see it in action once it gets delivered. It's crowdsourced, so you can donate as little as $10, or you can buy the entire item on the wish list or the needs list that I've created. So go check out my Throne creator needs list. We'll see you back on the episode. So what are the traits that make up the pioneers that I've done research on, that I believed translated forward to now, where we can move it forward in postmodern America and say that if you stand for these things or have these personality traits or value these things, they make you a new pioneer culturally. I've filtered all the data down and all the research I've done with all the works that I mentioned in the previous episode and the ones that I'll bring to your attention today and in future episodes. I've filtered down all that data, all that information, the 6 factors that made up the core motivation, mentality, the mindset of the pioneers at the founding of the American nation. And even really before then, back in the 1600s, when the nation was first founded as just colonies, just British colonies during the age of colonization, all the way on up to when they're established as a new nation in 1776, and then on up until now. What made those pioneers? So, number 1, honor. Number 2, respect. Number 3, humility. Number 4, faith. Number 5, honesty. And number 6, which is a big one, conviction. When the things that were said in the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents and the spirit of America moving forward, it was more about the conviction that they knew it was true based off of a system of belief, the things that they stood for. So Conviction is a big one. Now, there's a few things, as I mentioned, that I believe the American population got wrong. They had a very flawed Christian worldview that was based in the Puritan view of the full, perfect sovereignty of God, in the sense that he was literally controlling everything, like lightning storms and hurricanes and death and destruction from natural forces, forced adult copulation. I don't want to say the R word for YouTube, but all that kind of stuff, cancer, all that is controlled by God. And it's a very Old Testament only view, in the sense that behavior equals you're right and you're wrong. And really, the modern church is still responsible for perpetuating the idea of the Puritan ideal of Christianity. And we're really still based in the Western culture, especially in America, in our church, on Puritan ideals. If you look at like movies from like the Salem witch trials and stuff like that, or Sleepy Hollow, the reverends, the church folks, the clergy behave that way. That's really still a lot of people's perception of the church today. And we haven't done a whole lot to counteract that. So that's a story for a whole different series. Remember, season 4 coming up, if you think back a couple episodes to the wrap up of our last Foundations episode. And I'm already planning season 4 and season 5. Quick taste of what those are going to sound like. Number 4 is going to be called The House of Wolves. And it's going to be talking about Christianity and the modern church. And then season 5, Systems of Control. So stay tuned. Some hard conversations and hard questions are going to be asked and brought to the forefront, and I may not have answers for all of them. So I'm excited about that one. Now, let's wrap into the content. I am ready for this episode, so let's get started. Okay. Number 1, I'm on the right notebook page now. Honor. There was a whole culture of honor, honoring your elders, honoring government leaders to the extent that you needed to. As much as government was a necessary evil, honoring your father, your mother, your family, your community, other fellow community members, other citizens of the United States. Honor was a big factor in the culture that forced pioneers forward. Honor went a long way. There was always this sense of how it ties into respect, which is that second factor. Respect goes a long way as well in their attitudes. Now, if you look forward to now in postmodern America, the antithesis of that is a culture of insincerity, a culture of irony, a culture of lack of honor and lack of respect. There's a lot of selfishness out there, really, and I argue rather accurately that it's a very justifiable and defensible standpoint to look at the world philosophically and say that there's rampant narcissism in today's culture. And it's not just like this horrible thing that's just like this self-feeding cycle and there's just a bunch of narcissists now. Social media, mainstream media, horrible parenting over the generations, but it's also now encouraged, right? There's actually scripture that talks about that, right? So in Romans, it talks about that not only are these evil behaviors done by people, but they celebrate other people that do those things, right? That's in Romans 1. The antithesis to the culture of honor and respect is what we have now, which is rampant narcissism and this culture of irony, culture of insincerity. I mean, look, if you watch any modern movie right now, especially like the popcorn munchers, like I like to call them as a cinephile, as a connoisseur of film and music, if you look at like Marvel movies, for example, there's a lot of sort of pandering to the younger generation and kind of pointing and laughing at this sad, old, decrepit, depressed, older generation. Like old is always kind of like out of their prime and they suck. Or if there's any sort of serious moment in a film, especially those types of films, the popcorn munchers, the entertainers, which it's entertaining until it gets to become a trope, which I hate, and I hate cliches. And so then it becomes not entertaining anymore. Watch any Avengers movie, any Marvel movie in the cinematic universe, and you see all kinds of even serious moments are always ruined by some sort of like tongue-in-cheek comment or quote, or like some serious conversation is had and it's like just ruined by some quip or something like that. It's like, we aren't really being serious. You don't want to be too serious because being serious and being sincere is considered corny. Losers do that. Like, come on, don't take life too seriously. That kind of thing. So one thing that ties all these first three together is the third factor, which is humility. And that in itself is an antithesis to the narcissism rampancy that we see. Humility. Now, another thing that the founders got wrong. So point number 2, that I believe the pioneers of the early Americas and the founding fathers, that culture, that generation or 2 or 3 got wrong, was extreme humility to the to the point that it was performative. If you want to use a modern cultural term, it was performative humility. For example, in the book The Pioneers by David Macaulay, you read about the Cutler family, Manasseh Cutler, who was responsible for founding what I think is the second most important document in the American founding. It's called the Northwest Ordinance. So Manasseh Cutler, the Reverend Manasseh Cutler out of Boston, was one of the primary people that helped write the Northwest Ordinance and then get it adopted and pushed through in Washington. His son, Ephraim Cutler, was responsible for founding one of the first cities in the Northwest Territory, which was Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, called Marietta, Ohio. Small town. There's still a college there. Ephraim Cutler was responsible for founding a lot of that city, and he was like a main key player outside of a couple other guys that helped make the Northwest Territory happen, the Northwest Ordinance happen in 1787. When he would write to his father, Reverend Manasseh Cutler, or other writings to other officials or whatever, he would always be super self-deprecating about, hey, I'm approaching you with XYZ statement or question or encroachment that I'm complaining about, or even just like his scientific writings. And he would always approach it from, listen, this is just my bare base opinion, and I know it's not worth a whole lot, and so on and so forth. And this guy was like a giant in the founding of the United States. You also see it as I show you another source that we're going to be using for today. This is my presidential inaugural addresses book. It's an awesome book, by the way. It goes all the way up to Donald Trump or Obama, one of the two. I haven't gotten that far yet because I really don't care reading past the Civil War. You see, even George Washington comes up here, and his second inaugural address is like literally, that's it. That was a presidential inauguration address. And he was basically like, listen, I hope I did a good enough job last time. Obviously, I guess I kind of did, sort of, for y'all to elect me again. And I hope God gives me the patience and fortitude to do it again for another 4 years. It's just like, this guy's a legend, establishing an entirely brand new nation on entirely brand new founded principles that had never existed in human society before. The dichotomy between the super individual, that American ideal, that American exceptionalism, and then being also in a collective whole and being a part of a society that has a social compact to live and govern together and exist together in culture. The father of all fathers of the founders. And he's over here, even in his first speech, and saying, listen, I hope I do a good enough job. I'm probably not the best candidate. I feel like there's actually a lack of that and a need for that kind of performative humility to a degree. Now, I'm not big on performative stuff at all, right? But there was this sense that you never wanted to kind of like live above your station. But there is a place for that, I still think, in society, but they really went pretty extreme with it. I mean, they were performatively self-deprecating in a lot of ways, and it was culturally expected to be that. And if you weren't that, it was offensive to whoever you were addressing. There's those things to think about when you're thinking about those first three factors: honor, respect, and humility. But those were things that helped drive them forward because they understood the sense of things and sort of their context and their place among things. They took the biblical advice, which is very Puritan, which Puritans got a lot of things right. And one thing that they got right was that culture of honor and that culture of respect. But it was rooted in the biblical concept of, as they say in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says, don't think of yourselves more highly than you ought. Right now, there's different context for that and why Paul said that in the Bible, but they also apply that to their cultural ideas. There's a severe lack of that in our culture today. So here's where it is. Before we move on to the next three factors, I bundled them in like packages of three. You see those three tie together. If you believe in honoring things and being sincere and being genuine, in letting serious moments be serious and not living too much on the edge of doing things for impressions, doing things for the heck of it, being a troll, right? As they say online, at least in gaming, trolling, or being a griefer. Back in the day, they used to call them griefing in video games. That's like an old school term that my generation in video gaming came up with. And now it's just trolling or memeing in video gaming. So we live in like a meme culture. We live in a sort of insincere culture. It's okay to let things be serious that are serious. The younger generation right now, so my Gen Z guys that are listening, and really younger millennials as well, we're told that the young generation is the end all, the be all, they're the cream of the crop, that they know everything, that youth is vibrancy and youth is truth and youth is the gold standard. Where back in the day, youth was like treated the way I really think it should be treated. And this is like, I guess, a get off my lawn kind of opinion. Youth was ignorant. It had to learn. It had to have experience. You're talking about way back in the day in the 1700s when life expectancy was not nearly as long as it is in modern society today for a lot of different reasons. But you had to be like 25 or 30 years old to run for U.S. Senate or president or other like high level stations. Even back then, where by the time you're 30, you may be like 10 to 15 years away from on the other side of pay dirt. So youth was put in its proper station, and now we've kind of like glorified it and idolized youth. Now, are a lot of the things that the older generations do wrong? Absolutely. Look at the greatest generation that fought World War II. When they came home and had kids, which were your baby boomers, dude, that greatest generation of fathers were, by all measurable standards, horrendous fathers. I mean, that's where you get the tropes of like the alcoholic father but yeah, I'm going down the street for cigarettes and you never come back. Like that was those dudes. They won World War II and defeated one of the super evil geniuses of our time, but then came back and were terrible fathers. Right? Look at boomers. If you look at the metrics, you let the summer of love happen, or you were the cause of it. Race riots in the 80s. That was a boomer thing because Gen X kids were just kids. I could go down the list of things. Gen X. Well, listen, you let the overstimulation of the economy and over glorification of materialism and the American dream from a consumer standpoint, which is not really the American dream at all. You let that happen. This materialistic consumer culture, y'all made that happen. You also made the Nintendo happen. So I can thank you for that as a gamer. I'm not paying 25 cents per pop for Battlestar Galactica in my local arcade, which would be fun. Thank you for video gaming Gen X. Now, not everyone is perfect, but there is this thing where if you get to a certain age, you're now considered irrelevant. We have to understand there's a system of honor and respect and humility that believes that everything and everyone is relevant and has value and is justified. And even if you absolutely disagree with somebody and can do it logically and respectfully, you can learn from any station of life, from anyone on any part of their journey in life. So that was a big part of the culture that made them successful because they were willing to learn. They were willing to understand their place in things and contextualize their things, and they were willing to be open-minded. It was a culture of exploration. We've talked about that in some of our cinematic stuff, our intros and our scripted intros and stuff like that. So let's move on to the next three factors: faith, honesty, and conviction. Faith is straight up there's no other explanation I can give for you for faith, Sunrise Lounge. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm talking about real faith, believing in a higher power, believing that there's some life after this, believing that there is salvation to gain and hell to shun. As an old minister used to say, there is an afterlife. It is what the Bible says it is. The Bible is the altogether gold standard truth. Now, where we can deep dive into this conversation more is when we're talking about things like the Declaration of Independence. So literally at the beginning, we hold these truths. There's some keywords in there and why they phrase it that way, to be self-evident that all men are created equal. You see in the Declaration, it shares that when the United States was taking their place among the powers of the earth and assuming the rights of nature and nature's God, we talked about how fragile the United States idea was. It's based off a system of morality that's based on Christianity. If there's not a moral standard that isn't human-based, if both the context and the subject are the same thing, meaning humans are the context and the standard for humanity, that's not a moral standard that works. In fact, it's not a moral standard at all by any psychological definition or real true logical definition. You have to have a standard that sits outside the context. That standard is that moral standard, that moral code that is rooted in right versus wrong that's laid out in the Bible. Now, honesty. Everyone's heard that story from George Washington about how he chopped down the cherry tree, and it's become like a cultural iconic story of his dad came back and said, "Who chopped down my favorite cherry tree?" And George Light's like, "I can't tell a lie, I did." Honesty was like a proper key to culture existing. Literally, society would not function without honesty. Honesty in trade and commerce, honesty in your profession, honesty in your relationships, in your fatherhood and your motherhood, in the government. Government was implicitly designed to be and trusted to be honest. Right now, our founders believe that real true government at the ultimate end use of it was literally nothing more than a necessary evil. And in fact, if people could be governed and live in a society and a social compact that John Locke talks about, where people willfully give up some of their rights to live in a society together, you have to do that to live in a successful society. That government is a completely necessary evil. And it's literally nothing more than that. But you have to understand that even though men are naturally, they naturally degrade into evil, humans are not inherently good. So they understood that and they put systems in place to help govern that. You have to have safeguards in place because people believed in a culture of honesty. And so they wanted government to be honest, even though there was no incentive for government to be honest because they're the ones that are in control. But it was a culture of honesty, person to person, and kind of on that societal interactive level, right? That brings us to our last thing that the founding pioneers had that made them successful, but conviction. Forming of sentences and sentence structure and word choice and that kind of thing. By them saying we hold these truths to be self-evident instead of saying these truths are self-evident, they were saying that we are inherently admitting that there is disagreement and other people don't believe this. But we are choosing to hold these truths to be self-evident. We believe based off of our convictions and our worldview based off of philosophy and moral standard from Christianity, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So there's a debate that maybe not all men are created equal. In fact, one of the greatest philosophers, if not the greatest philosopher, at least most well-known philosopher of all time, Aristotle, believed that not all men were created equal. But he was talking about it in a different way. He was talking about like mentally, like some people are smarter than others. Yes. Some people are more gifted physically than others. Absolutely. But what these men were saying is we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. What that meant was the same access to rights. That is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Later on in this season, we're going to have an episode called The Pursuit of Happiness. And we're going to talk about what real happiness is because it's not a joyful feeling. They could have said pursuit of joy. But very clearly they said pursuit of happiness. But what did happiness mean to them in the context of their time? And how does that translate forward to today? That's going to be a huge episode and I can't wait for that one. So again, it's foreshadowing, man. I nail these foreshadowing. Look, I'm so good at foreshadowing. It's ridiculous. So they didn't necessarily have full perfect proof other than like the Bible. And their philosophical standards that they felt like they had deduced over time from early philosophers like Aristotle and Plato all the way up to guys like Montesquieu and John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. They were convicted and they held convictions. They stood on their principles because they were convicted it was true and they were willing to gamble their lives on it. They were willing to go to war with the superpoweriest of superpowers of the time to say whether we win or lose, we have to stand on principle and say, this is what we believe. This is why we believe it. And we are willing to die for it. Victory was not assured. And in fact, it was actually very much the case that it was hanging by a thread for a long time. But they held those as convictions and not proofs. They weren't waiting for proof. They said, this is what we believe. And here's the evidence that we have lined out that says this is why we believe it. We're not just pulling this out of thin air and saying we believe this. We have a purely based conviction because of the intellectual work, the intellectual honesty. This is what we're convinced of. We are convicted of this. Most men held the conviction in that time that were founding the United States, that this form of government they were building was the form of government. They were very self-aware of what they call posterity. And you see that word used a lot. These men that designed this nation knew what they were doing. They knew they were standing in a place in history that was going to be life-changing. And so they were willing to stand on that based off their convictions. Now, and so that's the picture of the pioneer that translates forward to who we are today. So to wrap it down in to the final thing for this episode, the spirit of the pioneer, everything we've talked about. If you stand for honesty, sincerity, being genuine, treating the serious things as serious, loving who you love passionately, being convicted, not because someone told you to or because it's something that you've just agreed upon or you've understood for a long time, but because you've done the intellectually honest work of finding it out for yourself and researching your sources for yourself. If you hold convictions and stand by them and are willing to put your life on the line, psychologically, sociologically, or legitimately on the line, that's how you're a pioneer. If you say right is right, wrong is wrong, and here's why. If you believe in and live by and hold other people to the moral standard of the Bible and the Word of God and Christian faith and the Christian God, you are literally, and I'm not telling you anything you shouldn't already know, but if you are learning this for the first time, here's a wake-up call, especially young men that may be listening to this. You are on the fringe of society. You are now counterculture. If you believe in right and wrong, if you believe in standards of behavior, if you believe in truth and justice, if you believe in honor, respect, humility, faith, honesty, and conviction, you are on the frontier. You are on the edges of the map. You are a pioneer. And that's who we are in the Sunrise Lounge. It's part of the Sunrise Lounge Challenge. We are the new pioneers. And this is the new frontier. And that's it, Sunrise Lounge. Thank you so much for listening. Firm handshakes for listening all the way through. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube and on Spotify, iHeart as well, wherever you're listening. Make sure that you are connecting and engaging. Get down in the comments. Share us out to your other social media platforms. Also, custom Spotify playlists. Links are all down in the link tree. You can go to our merch store. You can go check out the Patreon and all the other awesome links at the link tree in the description. And of course, we have to give dad advice. I'm holding myself to a standard, and this one's going to be really, really quick. Stop texting and driving. I'm not explaining anything else. Just stop texting and driving. And with that, we are done and dusted. Firm handshakes. We will see you on the next episode. But before we go, I always have to remind the Sunrise Lounge, especially we start talking about more dangerous ideas and concepts like this, pull that hood up. Stay smart. And I will see you on the next one.